"Give me my son," he demanded after 25 years. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "You have no right to anything." Angela was a calm, beautiful young woman in the loud, busy world of the University of Lagos campus. She was quiet and graceful, but this hid the fact that she came from a very poor part of the mainland. Her family was good and honest, but they lived under the heavy cloud of not having enough money. This forced Angela to focus completely on her studies, knowing that her education was the only way to pull her family out of poverty. She wore old, simple clothes with great pride, always looking ahead and seeing her degree in mass communication as the powerful tool she needed to change their lives forever. The university showed her two different worlds every day: the broken-down student halls and the expensive, shining cars of the rich kids. This contrast reminded her constantly of the success she was fighting for. She spent most of her time in the library, surviving on cheap coffee and fierce ambition, almost never noticing the guys who tried to talk to her. She kept her guard up until the day she literally bumped into Femi outside the arts building. He was the opposite of her, relaxed, wearing expensive designer clothes, and walking with the easy confidence of someone who had never needed anything. His smile was charming, his apology was quick, and his pure charisma broke through Angela's defenses for the first time. Femi was the son of a very rich family, the Adekanals, who owned huge construction and property businesses. He was different from his rich friends because he was not openly snobbish. He just seemed not to care about his own wealth, which made him even more attractive. He was studying law mainly because his powerful father wanted him to, even though he was smart enough to do anything he wanted. The moment he saw Angela gathering her scattered books, he was completely hooked. She was real and focused, very different from the society girls he usually met. Femi found Angela's drive exciting, her serious nature a challenge, and her refusal to be impressed by him felt like the highest praise. Their first meetings were careful, with Angela slowly letting go of her caution and becoming truly curious about the glittering world he represented. Femi chased Angela with endless, grand romance, using his family's money to create amazing dates, yet everything still felt personal and special. He showed her a side of Lagos she'd only read about: private restaurants by the ocean, modern art places, and long late-night drives through rich neighborhoods where the air was always clean. For Angela, these experiences were dazzling. She felt like she was seeing the future she was working for, and Femi was the kind, powerful person holding the door open. She knew the huge difference between their backgrounds. His family lived in a marble mansion while hers lived in a small, damp room, but this only made their love stronger. They were bound by their smart ideas and their young, hopeful dreams. Their early years together were spent trying to balance the complicated social rules of the university. Femi's rich friends looked at Angela with curious, hidden scorn, which she met with quiet pride. Angela, in turn, struggled to understand Femi's easy wealth compared to her family's strong sense of honest work. But Femi was good at making a bubble just for them, telling Angela that their love was bigger than class differences and that nobody else's opinion mattered. He often skipped important family events to spend hours studying with her, or just watching the sunset, things that felt simple but powerful because they were acts of rebellion against his life. As time went on, their relationship moved from a simple campus romance to a deep, emotional need. Femi saw Angela as his anchor, a link to the real world his sheltered life missed, while Angela truly started to believe Femi's promises of a shared, incredible future. She let herself fall completely for his charming personality. The secrecy, the risk, and the knowledge that Femi's parents would never approve only made their secret meetings feel more fated. They were a perfect, impossible pair. Their differences made a strong, beautiful connection that seemed unbreakable, especially as they entered their final year, where the pressure of school and their personal lives were about to crash together. Their final year at the university was a hard test for both Angela and Femi. Writing their final thesis, constantly redoing projects, and planning their careers made the stakes in their relationship even higher. Angela felt the immense pressure from her parents, knowing her degree was their one shot at a better life. She dreamed of marrying Femi, even if his family fought it, as the final step to achieving all her goals and taking care of her parents. Femi, meanwhile, faced his own heavy weight, the pressure from his father to take over the family business after graduation. He spent every free moment with Angela, finding comfort and escape in her presence. Their romance had settled into a steady routine of soft words and huge plans for the future. Femi promised Angela over and over that they would marry right after graduation. This promise was her shield against her fear about their different worlds. He painted clear pictures of their future home, his role in the family company, and her success in media, always stressing that they were a team against his strict family. Angela held onto these promises, basing her entire life plan on them. During this time of deep closeness, they became less careful, truly believing their love was strong enough to survive anything. However, beneath Angela's certainty, a cold fear always ran. She had met Femi's mother, an elegant woman who was polite but distant, and who made it clear without saying a single bad word that Angela was not the daughter-in-law they wanted. Femi told Angela to ignore his mother's feelings, but Angela saw the iron will hidden under the soft looks. This deep tension, the secret fear of the Adekunle family's immense power, was always there in Angela's mind. She pushed it away, choosing to trust Femi over her own gut feeling, rushing headfirst into a commitment she now knew was much more serious than they could handle, especially as graduation day came closer. It happened late one night while they were studying, tired but excited about their upcoming freedom. Angela first felt the clear signs she couldn't ignore. She felt sick all the time, dizzy, and suddenly she couldn't stand the smell of Femi's favorite perfume. These feelings started a silent alarm bell in her mind. At first, she thought it was just the stress of their final projects, a natural reaction to months of hard schoolwork. But when the symptoms continued, a cold, sharp dread replaced the excitement about graduation. The truth hit her hard and fast, like a silent, terrible shock. Angela started calculating frantically. She bought a pregnancy test kit, her hands shaking as she read the positive result, 2 clear, red lines. Seeing it felt less like a gift and more like a total disaster that would stop her perfectly planned life. The baby would arrive exactly when she needed to start her mandatory National Youth Service Corps (NYSC) program, the vital first step into a good career in Nigeria. All her dreams, the job, the success, the freedom from poverty, seemed to break into a million pieces. The thought of telling Femi was terrifying. It would drag their romantic bubble down into the cold, demanding reality of adult life. She spent 2 agonizing weeks hiding the news, watching Femi closely, trying to figure out if he was ready to be a father and handle the chaos it would bring. He was deep in his law thesis, constantly talking about his father's plans for him to join the firm immediately. She saw his young, carefree nature, still protected by his family's money, and her fear grew bigger. Angela knew this news would be a bomb dropped into the delicate landscape of his family's high expectations. She decided she had to tell him in a quiet place, away from the prying eyes of the university and the rich distractions of his home. She picked their usual spot by the lagoon, planning to tell him that Saturday, steeling herself to hear a promise of commitment, but secretly fearing something much worse. The air by the lagoon that Saturday evening was heavy and humid, smelling of the familiar water and distant traffic. A typical Lagos night. Angela carefully chose her words, practicing them hundreds of times in her head, determined to present the news not as a huge problem, but as a future they would share. Femi came late, busy talking on the phone to his father about a job overseas. His mind was clearly focused on his future career and big money deals. Angela felt a tight knot in her stomach, the sharp difference in their lives suddenly very clear. It felt impossible to find a quiet, calm moment, so Angela just started talking, her voice shaky but strong. She placed her hand over his, pulling his attention away from the water. "Femi," she started, her eyes begging for him to connect with her, "I have something important to tell you. It changes everything." We're going to have a baby." The words hung in the still air, instantly and completely changing the direction of their lives. She watched his face closely, expecting surprise, maybe fear, but hoping to see a little spark of the joy he always promised them. Femi's first reaction was not joy, or even simple surprise, but a blank, frozen disbelief. His eyes slowly got wider, then narrowed suspiciously. He quickly pulled his hand away, a movement that felt like a sharp, physical rejection. The silence that followed felt suffocating, broken only by the sound of the water. He didn't speak for what seemed like forever, but when he finally did, his voice was cold and empty, completely missing the warmth she was used to. "A baby? Angela, are you absolutely sure?" His tone, instead of being supportive, was immediately filled with doubt and defense, a cold sting that ended their easy romance for good. Femi's first question of, "Are you sure?" quickly turned into a cruel interrogation that shocked Angela. He refused to believe her, demanding to see the test, questioning the timing, and subjecting her to questions that felt hurtful and insulting. "This can't be true, Angela. We were careful," he insisted, his voice growing harder with every word. He seemed to view the pregnancy not as something they made together, but as a mistake, a big problem that would mess up his perfect future plans. As Angela, hurt and confused, tried to calm him, explaining that nothing is ever 100% safe, Femi's attitude changed from disbelief to outright anger and accusation. The man she loved, the man who promised her everything, suddenly became a cold stranger. He started imagining situations, his privileged mind quickly adding up the social and financial cost of this inconvenient truth. He worried loudly about his powerful father's reaction, the scandal it would cause, and how it would instantly derail his career plans. His fear was so huge that it completely wiped out any trace of kindness or responsibility. Then came the terrible words that sealed the end of their love. "How can I be sure it's mine?" Femi's voice was a low, cutting whisper, but it felt louder than any shout. "We're in our final year, Angela. You're beautiful, and you're always around people. Maybe you've been sleeping around." The accusation was unfair, cruel, and completely unexpected. Angela felt sick, realizing that the man she trusted completely, the man she loved with all her heart, thought she was capable of such a lie. She just stared at him, unable to speak, the betrayal burning deep inside her soul and making all their past love worthless. Angela could not even start to defend herself against Femi's bitter accusation. The shock left her speechless, tears coming not just from the pain, but from the clear, sudden realization of who he really was. She saw the rich coward hiding behind the charming mask, terrified of responsibility and ready to ruin her name to save his own easy life. When she finally found her voice, it was weak and shaking, but filled with a strong resolve she never knew she had. She refused to beg or argue about the baby's father. His lack of trust was the final, devastating damage. "I won't talk about the father with you, Femi," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "God and I know the truth. But I will tell you this, I loved you. I believed your promises. And this betrayal, this horrible lie you just said, it hurts more than the thought of having this baby all alone." She realized, with a sharp, painful clarity, that she had been foolish to think his love could jump over the huge gap between their social classes. He could not make a real sacrifice, and the baby was just a problem he needed to get rid of to escape responsibility. The strong foundation of their 3-year relationship broke into dust right there by the lagoon. Femi, seeing the genuine hurt and the sudden, cold distance in her eyes, paused for a moment, a flash of guilt crossing his face. But the fear of his father's anger quickly won. He made a clumsy, desperate offer, suggesting she sort out the issue, a cruel way of asking her to get an abortion. This final, heartless suggestion put out the last spark of hope she held. Angela simply stood up, leaving him sitting there, speechless. She walked away from the lagoon, from their past, and from Femi, keeping her eyes straight ahead. She knew the road in front of her would be incredibly hard, but she would face it alone, refusing to be destroyed by his weakness. The split was final. She was pregnant, rejected by her family, and utterly alone. When Angela walked into her family's small house that night, she felt the shame radiating off her like a terrible heat. She carried the heavy news of her pregnancy and Femi's brutal rejection. Her parents, being very religious and traditional, were already worried about her late arrival and the secret nature of her relationship with the wealthy Femi. When she finally broke down and confessed the pregnancy and the father's devastating denial, their reaction was immediate and heartbreaking, much worse than she had imagined. Her mother fell into quiet, tearful sadness, seeing the news as a personal failure and a huge disgrace to the family. Her father's anger, however, was explosive and full of righteous fury. To him, Angela had done more than just make a mistake. She had brought public shame to a family whose most valuable thing was their good name and reputation for morality. He saw her relationship with the rich Femi as a dangerous ambition to live above her station, which had now ended in this complete disaster. The fact that the father was wealthy only made the hurt worse, showing the world how his daughter had been used and then thrown away. The arguments lasted late into the night, all focused on the unbearable shame of an unmarried pregnancy in their traditional community. Adding to the moral disaster was the harsh financial truth. They had almost no money as it was. Raising another child, especially one without a father's support, was not just difficult, it was impossible. After hours of terrible accusations, her father gave her the final command. She had created this shame, and she could not do it under his roof. With a broken heart but absolute certainty, he told her she was disowned, forced to leave, and face the consequences alone. Angela, numb from being betrayed twice, packed a small bag and walked out into the Lagos night, completely outcast. With nowhere to go and almost no money, Angela managed to find a temporary, very small room in a rundown, crowded building far from the university and her family. The reality of being disowned, losing her family's support and safety, hit her with brutal force. She was a student in her final year, educated but unable to get a job, clearly pregnant, and totally cut off. The shame weighed her down, but soon, the simple, raw need to survive took over. She had a life growing inside her, and taking care of it was now her only, most important focus. The first few weeks were a painful blur of crying and frantic searching for a place to stay. She found a tiny room, just big enough for a bed and a small stove, and had to pay a huge fee to a shrewd landlord who took advantage of her desperate situation. The noise, the heat, and the constant fear were a shocking change from the quiet life she was used to. She quickly sold her few valuable things, an old laptop, some jewelry Femi had given her, just to pay the first month's rent and buy basic food. The shock of being utterly alone was made worse by the tiredness of pregnancy and the constant, painful hunger that was her new companion. Angela knew she couldn't rely on pity. She had to work right away. Her university degree was useless now. No decent business would hire a pregnant woman without a completed national service certificate. She forced herself to swallow her pride and started searching the streets for any hard, low-paid job. She began by washing clothes for other people in the building, then moved on to selling cold sachet water and drinks at a busy traffic light during rush hour, balancing the heavy tray on her head despite the strain. The sun was burning hot, the customers were rough, but the small amount of cash she earned instantly felt like a huge win, proof of her fierce will to protect the child she carried. Her only driving thought was the baby, her innocent passenger on this frightening journey of self-reliance. As her pregnancy got further along, Angela's work became incredibly difficult. Standing for hours in the punishing Lagos sun, constantly managing the weight of the water tray, was agonizing. She switched from hawking to cleaning jobs, scrubbing floors in offices and homes late at night when her large stomach was less likely to be noticed or cause her to be fired. Her days were a non-stop cycle of tiredness, pain, and small wages, every coin carefully counted and saved for the baby's arrival. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford, constantly interrupted by worry, discomfort, and fear of the future. She received almost no proper medical care, only the very basic visits to a public clinic, often having to travel long distances on crowded, uncomfortable public buses. The clinic workers were often too busy and didn't care much, treating her situation with cold formality. She would watch other pregnant women arrive with caring partners or family members, a painful reminder of how completely alone she was. Childbirth, which should have been a time of comfort and planning, became a huge source of anxiety. She didn't know who would take her to the hospital, who would stand by her side, or how she would pay the final bills. The shame, which had been so overwhelming at first, slowly changed into a quiet, burning determination. Femi's betrayal and her family's rejection had taught her a harsh lesson in relying only on herself. She stopped crying, pushing all her emotional energy into a survival instinct that was almost superhuman. Every ache, every hunger pang, every insult from a demanding boss was absorbed and turned into fuel for her coming role as a mother. She talked constantly to the life growing inside her, promising it a world of love and opportunity, swearing she would never let it feel the pain of rejection she had endured. The baby became her only goal, the single reason she kept going through the brutal, unforgiving life of Lagos. The day David, her newborn baby, arrived was a terrifying, lonely experience that Angela would never forget, a true horror show of isolation. Labor started late at night during a heavy rainstorm in her tiny, dimly lit room. There was no one to call, no frantic rush to the hospital with a concerned partner. She had to crawl out of her room, holding her small savings tight, and drag herself through the wet, dark street to find an expensive, unreliable taxi to the nearest public maternity hospital. The pain was huge, but the sheer terror of being alone was worse than the physical agony. She entered the hospital as just a number, without the usual cheerful family and friends. The hours in the public ward were filled with indifference and exhaustion. Angela was treated as just another sad case, an unmarried young woman who had made a big mistake. She went through the long, painful hours of labor completely alone, clutching the cold metal rails of the bed, her screams lost in the noise of the busy ward. When David finally came, a small, perfect boy with his father's clear, smart eyes, the relief was immediate and total. She held him close to her chest, the pain instantly forgotten, replaced by a fierce love that felt like a powerful shield. In that moment, the world shrunk to just the two of them, and she made a promise to protect him forever. But the problems didn't stop with the birth. The hospital demanded the minimal fees right away, which wiped out almost all of Angela's carefully saved money. She was sent home within 24 hours because the ward was too full, forcing her to walk back to her small, damp room, balancing the newborn baby, a tiny bag of things, and the heavy weight of her new responsibility. The first days of motherhood were filled with no sleep, poor food, and the desperate need to start working again immediately. She fed David while trying to prepare small meals to sell to her neighbors. The baby powder smell mixed with the smell of fear and cooking stew. Angela was a mother, but more importantly, she was a fighter in a solitary war for her child's future. With a newborn depending on her, Angela's fight became much harder. Feeding David was her only moment of rest, a short, tender break in her non-stop daily toil. She quickly realized that selling things on the street or cleaning was impossible with a baby. She focused on jobs she could do from her tiny room, mostly small trading and hand-sewing work. She got a deal with a local tailor to sew on buttons and finish clothes, working late into the night by a flickering lamp while David slept next to her on the narrow bed. Her meals were simple and poor. She often skipped eating so she would have enough energy to produce milk and enough money for things like lamp oil and baby medicine. She learned to argue hard for better pay, to ignore the pitiful looks of her neighbors, and to work with an almost machine-like efficiency. The work was boring and physically tough, leaving her hands rough and her eyes constantly tired, but the sight of David's happy, sleeping face was her only and most powerful reason to keep going. She had to survive and succeed, not just for herself, but for the son Femi refused to claim. She kept careful notes, tracking every single penny earned and spent. Her constant goal was to save enough to get a better place for David, away from the damp and the noise. She looked at David's face all the time, searching for any sign of Femi, and often finding it in his strong jaw and focused eyes, a resemblance that both hurt and fueled her anger. She never said Femi's name. Her past was completely closed, and the future belonged only to David. Her life had become one single, unbreakable mission, making sure David got the best education and the chances she had lost. The powerful bond between mother and son, forged in this hard life, became an absolute loyalty against the world. As David grew from a baby into a curious, active boy, the nature of Angela's struggle changed again. She needed more than just food and shelter. She needed safety, early education, and a community that wouldn't judge her son for not having a father. She saved enough money to move to a slightly better, though still very simple, apartment in a quieter area, a small victory she celebrated silently. She started selling snacks and small items from a small kiosk near a busy secondary school. This gave her a steady income and allowed David to stay close by under her watchful eye. David, whom she named David Chakuma, was a very fast learner and a keen observer. He learned to read early, fascinated by the old, donated books she kept under the counter. Angela, despite being exhausted, used every free moment to teach him, filling him with deep respect for learning. Since she couldn't afford the best schools, she became his first and best teacher, using every moment to teach him languages and basic math. She saw in his bright, questioning eyes the potential for greatness, a potential that deserved the platform Femi's wealth could have given but had been cruelly taken away. She kept the truth about his father a complete secret from David. When he asked about his father, Angela had a simple, firm story. Your father was a good man who had to leave early, but he wanted you to be the very best and the brightest. The story was vague but strong, meant to stop him from becoming bitter and instead push him toward success. She focused on his future, turning her huge, secret anger at Femi into a fierce, almost desperate drive to ensure David's success was so clear that it would one day shut up all the critics. Her fierce dedication was her strongest tool, the relentless, silent engine powering their tough journey through the hard city of Lagos. By the time David was ready for primary school, the money problem had become enormous. Angela refused to send him to the cheapest school, believing the first few years were the most important. She researched tirelessly, found a decent private school, and relentlessly begged the owner to give David an entrance exam. David, driven by his mother's nonstop work, did brilliantly and won a partial scholarship based on his smarts, which was a lifeline. Still, the rest of the school fees were a huge obstacle, forcing Angela to work even more. She added another stream of income, taking on an early morning cleaning job before opening her kiosk. This physical routine left her constantly drained. She learned to make and sell local breakfast foods, hot bean cakes and corn porridge, at sunrise, often getting only 4 hours of sleep. The community respected her non-stop work, calling her a woman of steel. They saw the quiet determination in her eyes and the obvious intelligence of her son, a testament to her sacrifice. Her life had no comfort, no social life, and no personal dreams. All her energy was directed outward, toward David. David, very aware of his mother's sacrifices, was driven by a powerful, silent promise to repay her. He was a perfect student, hardworking and competitive, always getting the highest grades. He understood that the tired lines on his mother's face were etched there from working hard just for him, and the worn state of his own books reflected their lack of money. He would rush home from school to help her clean the kiosk or deal with customers, taking on the role of a supportive man much too early. This shared burden, this silent agreement between mother and son, cemented their partnership against the world. David's goal was not just to succeed, but to reach the point where he could make his mother rest and live the comfortable life she truly deserved. David entered his teenage years with a powerful, intellectual mind that made him stand out. He wasn't just smart, He was logical and penetrating, with a sharp focus that was surprising for a boy his age. He read everything he could find, especially books on law, history, and politics, completely fascinated by how justice and power worked. Angela saw his thirst for knowledge and encouraged it fiercely, making sure every single coin that could be spared went toward books, private lessons, or extra classes, even if it meant she ate only once a day. She saw the rich world of Femi's family not as a sad memory, but as a goal for David to conquer on his own terms. He quickly decided to pursue law as a career. He loved the way arguments were structured, the precise language of the law, and the idea of holding powerful people accountable. He saw law as the best tool for someone from a poor background, a way to compete based only on skill, not inherited wealth. When Angela heard his declaration, she felt a sudden chill. The irony was devastating. Her son was determined to join the very profession that was Femi's birthright. She supported him completely, but deep down she knew that following the law would bring him closer to the circle of power where Femi lived. As David prepared for his entrance exams for the university, the financial pressure was at its highest point. Angela took on an extra weekend job cleaning a large office building, hiding how exhausted she truly was from David. David, in turn, tutored younger students to pay for his application forms and transport. Their shared goal, getting him accepted into a top law program, bound them together in a focused, almost military partnership. They were a small army of two, fighting for one big prize, escaping Lagos's grinding poverty and bringing honor back to Angela's name through her son's undeniable success. David's brilliance shone brightly when the university results were announced. He was accepted into the extremely competitive law program at a highly respected university in Lagos, a moment of profound, tearful victory for Angela. It was the reward for 15 years of non-stop sacrifice. However, the celebration was immediately overshadowed by the huge financial cost of university life: fees, books, housing, and upkeep. The reality of the expense was sobering. Angela spent the last of her emergency savings, sold her kiosk business for a lump sum, and moved her work back to cooking and delivering food from home. This was a cheaper business that allowed her to put more money toward David's education. She insisted that David live in the school hostel, despite the higher cost, believing the environment was crucial for his focus and networking. She visited him faithfully, bringing him home-cooked meals and small amounts of cash, always arriving with an encouraging smile, never telling him how much she was going without. She looked older than her years, worn out by the constant hustling, but her spirit remained strong. David's time at university was marked by the same deep discipline he learned from his mother. He was the quiet student who wore carefully mended clothes and always carried books, a clear contrast to his richer classmates. However, he was driven not by bitterness, but by a strong, internal thankfulness. He knew his mother was giving up everything for him, and he worked twice as hard, determined to excel in every mock trial, every exam, and every legal project. The memory of his unknown father, Femi, was a constant, unspoken motivation, fueling his desire to climb to the very top of the profession and prove that true worth came from hard work, not family background. The next 5 years of law school and practical legal training flew by in a blur of intense study and little sleep. David excelled, always graduating at the top of his class. His brilliant mind earned him the respect of his richer peers and the support of important professors. He naturally loved fighting cases in court, enjoying the drama and the sharp intellectual challenge of questioning witnesses. His focus was like a laser, his arguments clear and powerful, showing a maturity far beyond his age. After completing his mandatory legal service, David was immediately hired by one of the biggest, most famous law firms in Lagos, the exact type of elite legal world that served clients like the Adekunle family. His first salary was more than Angela had earned in the last 10 years combined. His first paycheck was an incredible moment. He immediately found a comfortable, modern apartment for his mother in a safe area, paid off the loan on a small business space for her, and demanded she stop the hard, manual labor. Angela cried for the first time in years, the tears not of sadness, but of pure, exhausted relief. The promise she had made to herself 25 years ago had finally come true. David quickly became known in legal circles as an amazing talent, sharp, fiercely protective of his clients, and famous for never losing a big case. His success was rapid, his name becoming known for high-stakes court battles, especially when representing ordinary people or smaller companies fighting against giant corporations, a quiet echo of his own past. He never spoke about his family or where he came from, keeping a professional distance that only added to his mysterious reputation among the city's elite lawyers. He had reached the very top, a self-made man who commanded respect in the same circles that had once insulted his mother. While Angela and David were fighting their way up from nothing, Femi Adekunle had inherited the huge family business. He married a beautiful woman from an appropriate, wealthy family soon after graduating, a marriage organized by his parents to solidify their business ties. On the outside, his life looked perfect, huge wealth, corporate power, and a perfect social standing. He ran the family business well, fulfilling every hope his father had for him. But beneath the polished surface, his life was hollow, marked by a deep, unspoken emptiness. The biggest disappointment for the Adekunle empire was the lack of a child to inherit the name. After 10 years of marriage, Femi and his wife, Tolu, had tried every fertility treatment, doctor's visit, and prayer Lagos society offered, but nothing worked. The pressure from his parents, who valued their family line above all else, became unbearable. Finally, many embarrassing medical tests confirmed the painful truth. Femi had a severely low sperm count, meaning he could not have children. The devastating news shattered his feeling of power and manhood, leaving him feeling weak and desperate. His vast wealth and influence meant nothing without a son to inherit them. Femi's private failure started an obsessive need to find a child. Suddenly, he remembered Angela, the forgotten girlfriend, the inconvenient pregnancy from 25 years ago. That memory, which he had pushed down with shame and denial, now resurfaced as his only hope. He convinced himself that the child, if it really was his, was the last proof of his fertility, his final chance for a biological heir. The cruel joke was clear. The very responsibility he ran away from 2 decades earlier was now the one thing he desperately wanted. He hired a private investigator, starting a costly and desperate search for the woman he had wronged, driven by a singular, consuming urgency. Femi's obsession with finding Angela and the child quickly took over his corporate life. He gave most of his responsibilities to other managers and spent hours going over the reports given by his expensive private investigator. The trail was faint, cold after 2.5 decades. Angela had left the university, cut off her family, and moved several times in the poor areas of the mainland. She had survived by being deliberately invisible, a ghost in the vast city of Lagos. The investigator, a former meticulous police officer, finally managed to locate Angela's former neighbors and followed the few old records of her vending license applications. After months of dead ends, they finally located her current residence, a comfortable but ordinary apartment building in a middle-class area. The investigator's report contained only basic facts and a recent photo of Angela, now a dignified, middle-aged woman, but it mentioned no grown son, only referring to her as a self-employed small business owner. This missing information only cemented Femi's belief that she had hidden the child, maybe to protect him from Femi's influence or, more likely, to deny Femi his rightful son. Femi felt a surge of possessiveness and entitlement. He viewed the child as his property, his biological right, and Angela as simply the caretaker who had overstayed her welcome. The idea that she might have raised his son in poverty, or worse, hidden him in simple anonymity, fueled his self-righteous anger. He decided to confront her directly, not with an apology, but with a demand. He was sure his current wealth and power would easily crush her and force her to give up the young man he desperately needed to save his family name and secure his future. The stage was set for the inevitable, explosive meeting. Two lives that had taken opposite paths were about to crash violently together after 25 years. Femi arrived at Angela's new home, not in his usual protected car, but in a quiet, luxury SUV, planning to keep his visit low-key. He waited until the evening, when she was most likely to be home. When Angela opened the door, she didn't recognize him right away. The handsome university student was gone, replaced by a heavier, well-dressed man whose eyes showed strained desperation, though the familiar, proud tilt of his chin remained. His presence on her doorstep 25 years later felt like a forgotten bad dream, a ghost from a past she had worked so hard to bury. When Femi finally said his name, the color drained from Angela's face. The shock was complete, instantly followed by a wave of burning anger that surprised even herself. She had spent 2 decades preparing for this moment, suppressing this very confrontation. Femi, mistakenly thinking her silence was fear or respect, immediately launched into his practice speech. He talked about his current situation, his terrible infertility news, and his desperate need for an heir. He painted a grand picture of his family's legacy and the massive fortune waiting for the boy, never once mentioning his past cruelty or apologizing for his betrayal. "Angela," he said, his voice a careful mix of arrogance and fake sincerity, "I know what I did was wrong, but that was long ago. We need to look forward. I need my son. I can give him everything. A name, a dynasty, billions. I am begging you. Give me my child." Angela listened to his entire, self-centered speech, her face a mask of cold fury. When he finished, she simply shook her head, her voice low and steady, completely stripped of emotion. "There is no child here, Femi. You walked away from your duty 25 years ago. Now you have no right to anything." Femi was clearly shaken by Angela's flat, immediate denial. He had expected tears, maybe a fight, but not this total, cold refusal. Her lack of emotion destroyed his carefully planned request. He pushed her harder, pointing out that his investigator confirmed she had moved and lived a solitary life. "Don't lie to me, Angela. I know you had the child. Where is he? Is he grown? Is he safe? You can't stop a father from seeing his son, especially one who can give him this kind of future." His voice rose, changing from pleading to demanding, the old arrogance instantly returning. Angela stood firm, her denial unbreakable. "You made your choice 25 years ago when you called me a liar and walked away. You chose your money and your family name over us. That child, if he exists, is mine alone, a life you gave up the right to claim." She repeated her statement, "I do not have your child. Now get off my property." She knew she was lying, but the thought of handing David over to the man who had caused her so much pain was impossible. David was her creation, her greatest achievement, not Femi's convenient solution. She knew David would hate the truth, and she was determined to protect him from Femi's manipulative influence. Femi, frustrated and desperate, finally let his anger explode. He threatened legal action, convinced that her refusal was just a tactic to get a huge financial payout. He saw her refusal as theft, a deliberate act of keeping his biological heir from him. "If you won't give him to me freely, I will take you to court," he growled, his face twisted in a look of entitlement. "I will force a DNA test and I will get custody. You cannot win against the Adiconal legal team." Angela met his threat with a calm, almost pitying look. "Do what you must, Femi. I have nothing left to lose. And you, it seems, have nothing left to gain." She slammed the door shut, locking out the ghost of her past and bracing herself for the inevitable legal battle. True to his word, Femi started legal proceedings for the court to recognize him as the father and grant him access to the child, whom he assumed was his adult son. The court papers arrived at Angela's door 2 weeks later. She read the formal, scary language, a direct sign of the immense power Femi controlled. Angela, despite her brave face, felt a shiver of fear. Femi's threats were now a terrifying reality, a high-stakes legal fight that she was completely unprepared to fight alone. She immediately consulted her personal savings. She needed the best, most discreet lawyer she could find. She went straight to the law firm of the city's rising legal star, a man whose reputation for winning impossible cases was unmatched, Mr. David Chukwuma. Angela knew exactly who David Chukwuma was. Her son. For David, his mother's visit was an honor and a mission. He knew she needed him, and he had spent his entire career preparing for this moment of final justice. David listened to his mother's harrowing account, not just as a lawyer, but as the son who had lived the story. She spoke about Femi's betrayal, her struggle, and Femi's current desperate lawsuit. Angela kept one vital piece of information from David, though, that Femi had no idea that David Chukwuma, the formidable lawyer he was about to face, was the lost son he was seeking. This was Angela's secret weapon, a surprise she knew would be more devastating than any evidence. David agreed to take the case, his goal clear: to destroy Femi's claim and secure his mother's peace forever. Angela and David worked together, but they maintained a professional mask even when alone. They meticulously prepared the defense, focusing on the 25 years of abandonment, which David knew was Femi's greatest legal weakness. David was filled with silent fury, realizing the man who caused his mother so much pain now sought to claim his success. He was determined to not only win the case but deliver a personal verdict. Angela watched her son, her heart filled with a complex mix of pride and fear. She saw the resemblance to Femi in his sharp mind and fierce focus, but saw her own fighting spirit in his morality and dedication. She knew Femi would never recognize the child he scorned in this successful, respected lawyer. The final confrontation would not be a legal battle, it would be a moment of divine reckoning. David soon arranged a mandatory pretrial meeting. He knew this informal discussion would be Femi's chance to make threats and test their resolve. For David, this meeting was the setting for the final act of the drama, the moment he would use his identity, kept secret by Angela for this purpose, to shatter Femi's world completely. Angela agreed to attend, ready to face her betrayer one last time, with her son standing as her shield and her weapon. The meeting was scheduled for the following week in a neutral, high-end conference room provided by a mediation company. It was meant to be a high-stakes, but informal, confrontation where both sides could test the other's resolve before committing to an expensive and very public court battle. Angela felt a new wave of anxiety, knowing she would be face-to-face with Femi again, but she trusted her lawyer completely. Mr. Chukwuma had prepared her thoroughly, telling her how to act, what to say, and the exact legal limits of the discussion. He warned her that Femi would likely try to use emotional blackmail or financial threats. David Chukwuma, however, was preparing his own secret, careful plan. He had studied the case, Femi's background, and the nature of the claim, feeling an unusually strong personal connection to the seemingly ordinary paternity dispute. He understood the case was not about money, but about family line, power, and a desperate man's last hope. He was determined not only to protect his client but also to completely dismantle Femi's self-serving story. He saw the case as a battle between true parental sacrifice and biological entitlement, and he knew which side was morally right. He arrived at the conference room early, setting up his materials, his attitude cool and professional. The tension in the empty room was noticeable. He watched the door, waiting for Femi Adekunle and his lawyer to arrive, ready for a confrontation that had been building for 25 years. He was ready to defend his client, Angela, with all his considerable legal skill, completely unaware that Femi would soon realize that the lawyer fighting him was the lost son he was trying to find. Femi Adekunle arrived with his lawyer, a senior partner from one of the city's oldest and most traditional firms, known for his ruthless defense of the rich. Femi himself looked impatient, radiating a powerful mix of entitlement and anxiety. He barely looked at Angela when she entered with David Chukwuma, dismissing the young lawyer as just a professional hired gun. Femi was focused on Angela, the woman he believed was holding his heir hostage. The atmosphere in the conference room was thick with deep, angry feelings. Femi's lawyer started the meeting with a practiced, unemotional summary of their claim: Femi's current inability to have children, the past relationship, the pregnancy, and the undeniable biological right of a father to his child. He stressed the huge financial benefits the son would gain, presenting the case as a moral duty to give the boy his birthright and fortune. Femi watched Angela, expecting her to look weak under the financial pressure. Angela, following David's subtle, encouraging look, stayed calm. She remained completely silent, letting David Chukwuma do all the talking. David fought back with sharp, legal precision. He focused not on biology, but on the 25 years of abandonment. He exposed the weaknesses in Femi's moral standing, arguing that a father's rights are tied to his duties, and that a man who denied and abandoned a woman and his unborn child had forever given up his rights. The lawyer's arguments were delivered with such cold logic and devastating clarity that Femi started to look truly shaken, recognizing a powerful enemy who saw right through his rich exterior. As the legal arguments grew more intense, Femi's impatience broke through his carefully controlled composure. He couldn't stand the lawyer's calm, systematic destruction of his case, the non-stop focus on his moral failure 25 years ago. He interrupted his own lawyer, turning his angry eyes onto Angela. "This is rubbish. You raised him in poverty, in some shack, when he could have been given the best education and a life of privilege," he shouted, his voice rising in anger. "You denied him his birthright out of spite. That's why you are lying now. You want a huge settlement." Angela was about to fight back, her own temper flaring, but David Chukwuma immediately stepped in, his voice cutting through the noise with strong authority. "Mr. Adekunle, I must ask you to address your comments only through your lawyer. Furthermore, your claim that my client raised her son in a shack is unimportant. She provided a safe, loving home, while you provided nothing but denial and abandonment. Your focus on financial entitlement only proves how emotionally empty your claim is." The lawyer's defense of Angela was fierce and immediate, defending her honor as a mother. Femi, surprised by the lawyer's passion and his deeply personal defense of Angela's motherhood, turned his frustration fully onto David Chukwuma. He saw the lawyer as an arrogant young upstart, overly protective of his client and too eager to shame a man of Femi's position. The argument quickly became a sharp, personal exchange between the two men, which Femi was losing badly. Femi grew desperate, realizing his formidable opponent was completely destroying his case, both legally and morally. Driven to a point of pure, furious desperation by David Chukwuma's constant, factual attacks on his character and his right to claim fatherhood, Femi completely lost his cool. He leaned across the table, his eyes darting wildly from Angela's calm, defiant face to the lawyer's cold, analytical one. He was desperate to find a weakness, a crack in their plan, something to prove that Angela was simply lying to get back at him. He wanted to shame the lawyer for fighting for a child Femi believed was a phantom. He pointed a shaking finger at Angela, then looked with contempt at David Chukwuma, the young lawyer who had humiliated him so thoroughly. Femi believed Angela was hiding the boy's existence, and he was about to use this lawyer's supposed ignorance to shame her. "I don't believe you, Angela," Femi yelled, his voice thick with anger and frustration. "You are protecting this anonymous nobody out of spite. You've hidden him so well that even your own lawyer doesn't know him. Have you ever met this child before? Or do you even know what the child looks like, young man?" Femi challenged David Chukwuma directly, expecting an answer that would prove the lawyer was just a paid stranger fighting for a lie, further highlighting Angela's extreme secrecy. The second Femi's desperate challenge left his lips, the air in the conference room became still and cold. Femi's lawyer froze, sensing a huge, unpredictable mistake. Angela's steady calm finally broke, her eyes wide with a triumphant realization. She had waited 25 years for this exact moment. She looked at her son, David, the only person in the room who truly understood the weight of the question, and saw a subtle, powerful change in his whole manner. Femi had challenged the wrong man. David Chukwuma, the lawyer, did not move. He let the silence hang, heavy and suffocating, allowing Femi's words to highlight the complete irony of the situation. His intense gaze never left Femi's face, but his professional mask dropped completely, showing a cold, deep, personal intensity beneath. The corner of his mouth twitched in a look of profound, ancient satisfaction. He slowly, deliberately, put down his pen, leaned back in his chair, and crossed his arms over his chest. His eyes now carried a shared history Femi Adekunle could not even begin to understand. He looked straight at Femi, meeting the man's gaze with the familiar, sharp intelligence Femi had seen in his own mirror decades ago. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was no longer the formal voice of an attorney, but the deep, strong voice of a son delivering a long-awaited, impossible judgment. The two men, father and son, stood at a crossroads, two worlds crashing together in a single, silent moment of shared DNA and devastating recognition. David Chukwuma stared hard at Femi Adekunle, letting the entire weight of the 25 years, his mother's suffering, his own fight, and the long, tough climb to success, sink into his eyes. He saw the desperation in Femi, the fear of a man losing his legacy, and felt no pity, only a cold, powerful sense of having earned his victory. His voice was calm, measured, and absolutely final, each word hitting Femi with the force of a hammer. "Mr. Adekunle," David began, using the formal title now with a sharp, icy disrespect. "You asked if I know this child. You asked if I had met him. You challenged my client, my mother, for lying to you about his identity." He paused, looking down at Angela, who was now crying silently, a look of painful, proud surrender on her face. Then he looked back at Femi, a sudden, powerful flash of his mother's fighting spirit crossing his face. He slowly reached into his suit and pulled out a worn, black and white photograph. A picture of a young Angela, smiling brightly, holding a newborn baby. He placed it carefully on the table between them. "I have known this child since the day I was born," he stated, his voice getting louder. "I have met him every single day for the last 25 years. And I know exactly what he looks like, Mr. Adekunle." He stood up slowly to his full height, resting his hands on the table, leaning forward into the shocked silence of the room. "Because, Mr. Adekunle," he finished, delivering the ultimate secret with the quiet, crushing finality of a court judgment, "I am that child." The words hit Femi with a physical force greater than any punch. He seemed to lose all the air in his lungs. David Chukwuma, the famous lawyer, had been systematically destroying his court case. The brilliant, cold, powerful enemy who carried the undeniable weight of Femi's own DNA, now standing before him as the abandoned son he was desperately trying to find. The horrible irony of the situation struck him all at once. He was being sued by his own son, who was also defending the mother. His wealth, his power, his entire life structure suddenly collapsed under the weight of this single, undeniable truth. Femi's face lost all color, turning a shocking shade of gray. His eyes, wide with shock and horror, darted quickly from David to Angela, who stood tall and proud behind her son. The image of David's strong, educated, successful presence, the very success Femi had wanted to claim and pay for, was overwhelming. The man he had scorned and condemned to poverty had risen, all on his own, to become the only thing standing between Femi and his last hope for an heir. The lawyer was not just defending his mother. He was delivering a long-delayed, perfectly planned revenge. His body, already weak from the stress of his infertility and the lawsuit, finally gave out. With a silent gasp, Femi Adekunle's knees buckled. His senior lawyer quickly jumped up in alarm, but it was too late. Femi collapsed onto the polished conference room floor, a silent, defeated heap of expensive clothes and shattered entitlement. The man who had denied his son a name and a future had finally met his match, fainting from the shock of realizing that his forgotten past had risen up, armed with a law degree and a relentless sense of justice, to deliver the final, devastating verdict. The case, the lawsuit, and Femi's legacy had just ended, not in a court of law, but in the most personal and painful confrontation possible. Do you think the outcome of this story was good? What would you have done if you were Angela? Would you have just let Femi take your son? Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to see more videos like this, and share this with friends and family.